Hello and welcome to the Defiant Spirit podcast and the Meaning Project podcast, the combined work of Rabbi B. Baruch Halevi and Dr. Daniel A. Franz. Rabbi B and Dr. D joining forces once again, the X-Men of existential analysis.
Oof,
How you doing, B?
that was a good one. The X-Men of existential. We put the X in existential.
Well, we're recording this around Independence Day, the 4th of July. I've got an old Captain America shirt on, so I was just inspired by Marvel today that when you think of independence and freedom, what better ideas than a defiant spirit and meaning when we talk about the 4th of July?
So good, so good. Yes, lots to talk about. I want to get into this idea of freedom. I've missed our time together. It's been at least a month or so since the last one. I think we said that the last time too, right?
We did. And funny, I was on a conversation with another therapist, a friend of mine today. And, the casual, what are you up to? I said, man, I'm getting ready for another conversation with Rabbi B. She says, first of all, you have your hands in about a dozen different pots. What are you really up to? And you and that Rabbi B talk an awful lot. I'm like, but we don't. We just really maximize the time we have together.
That's right. It just feels a long time when you're listening to us, but time flies on
It might be. Well, the funny thing is my last podcast, B, was I timed them out wrong. I did one of Dr. Graber's, if you remember the lovely Dr. Graber from GTF. I timed out one of her speeches wrong. The first one was like 45 minutes. And last week was maybe 12. So whoever was running was really grateful it was only a 12-minute podcast.
I was once told before I give a sermon, it really doesn't matter how long you give it, but just make it interesting and stop talking before your congregation leaves. Right?
Yep, there you go.
It's a very low bar, and we're going to try and really stick to it today.
I'll tell you another story on last week's podcast, though. I don't think anybody was leaving because she refers often to the human organism and some things there. So you can guess how I may have misread that word at one point and misspoke. Yeah, see, you're laughing already. I have a feeling people were hanging on to see what other Freudian slip might have come out of my mouth last podcast. So we'll try to avoid those this time.
Or not.
Or not. So let's talk about freedom, B. I actually pulled up a quote here. Let me hop to it. Dr. Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning says, freedom or liberty. He says, balance with liberty. Freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. And you and I love that word, responsible. He goes on to say, that is why I recommend that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a statue of responsibility on the West Coast.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell, right? Now, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
So I think of jazz. I think I've used this analogy before, but I always think about it when we're talking in terms of Frankl's, the tension that is necessary of that responsibility, the structure around freedom to make it possible to be free. So good jazz music isn't just riffing and everybody doing their own thing. It's a structure. The masters have a structure, and within the structure, they can riff. They can go in different directions. But you need the structure. You need the canvas if you're a painter. You need the boundaries in a society or the laws or the borders, something to push off against. Otherwise, it's just anarchy.
Right. Too often freedom, we think of freedom as, that ability to do whatever we want. And there are still social constraints of good behavior, just being a good human. But also, if we're all seeking meaning in different directions, I think that's bound to be in unison in some way.
Well, our society is really grappling with this, at least in our lifetime, in my opinion, now more than ever before, right? Because you can feel like all these different instruments in the band wanting to play in different directions, and we're going to have to find some degree of harmony, some degree that we're all playing together in the band, and yet the old model of everybody plays this tune doesn't work.
Right. I think that's such a good analogy. If everybody's playing in their own style, their own way, it's disharmony, right? It sounds horrible. Nobody's going to listen to that. But you're right. I think we see that in the media, and just I think many of us just feel it, right? That disharmony of everybody going in a different direction, everybody demanding meet my needs. I am free, therefore I should be taken care of, or I should go the direction I want. It was funny. I had a not conflict, bit of a discussion with my oldest daughter the other day, talking about a friend and this idea of, well, she just really needed to take care of her right then, some friendship issues and things like that. And it was all about the individual. And I said, maybe sometimes when it comes to friendship, focusing on the other, that self-transcendent work, really brings connection. It brings meaning. It's so much more healthy than the movement we see all too often. Me, I got to take care of me.
It's such a fine line, you need that me, you need that sense of I need to riff and I need to play my own tune, and I am a part of something bigger than myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I need that structure. So I was just listening to Joe Rogan, who, may or may not be popular with our listeners. But what impresses me about Joe Rogan is that it's hard to pin him down on a label.
Mm-hmm.
Liberals want to say he's conservative and conservatives want to say he's liberal because it depends on the topic. And he really takes on topics around the topic, around the issue. I can't pin down this guy with an easy label because he takes the conversation, he sort of riffs within a structure, and you don't know where it's going to go. It's not predictable.
Right. I think I don't even care to pin him down. I think he is just a masterful interviewer. And he brings in, now for me personally, I listen to the people I'm interested in either viewpoint, but usually it's science or philosophy or current events. Not big on his MMA stuff. I can honestly say I've never listened to one of them. Maybe I should.
It's true. There's a lot on MMA.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can handle. I don't know if he does 3 hours. His usual interview is a 3. I love that idea of a long form interview because you can definitely get into some serious questions. And the people that I listen to, he does go in depth with some great questions.
And they start with the structure and they riff within it, but you don't know, they're not bound to the labels or so there's a freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I see it across the board. It's not just Joe Rogan. It's in different industries. It's in the way we can consume media now, where I need structure. So I'll go over to this podcast and listen to that and get some of that. And I go over here and listen to that. But there's still a structure and there's a freedom. And I guess I'm just saying it because I think now more than ever before in history, we're grappling with what's the structure. The old ones don't seem to be holding up. And we're kind of looking at the negativity of it breaking apart. The freedom is we have more freedom to move about now, have conversations, kind of cross-pollinate and breed and ideas from different genres, and it's exciting. It's also terrifying, and this is, I think, where Frankel's getting into this space between totally liberating freedom and totally oppressive, structure, and somewhere in between, holding those tensions.
Right. I was just flipping through. I believe it was either The Will to Meaning or again Man's Search for Meaning this morning. I think it was Will to Meaning. And he writes in there about the breakdown. I mean, even back when he was writing in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, he was writing about the breakdown of modern traditions and values, and that although some of us may be fearful of that, it's a necessary part of human evolution, of cultural evolution, and that even if the traditions of society break down, there's still the opportunity to find meaning, even more opportunity to find meaning as you and I are sharing it, because we see this vacuum. Maybe it's an existential vacuum. Maybe it's a vacuum of traditions. And we get to make free and responsible decisions. How we're going to live our lives, how we're going to support our community, how we're going to love our families, all of these decisions of the moment.
And don't you see this in our world that, it's always trying to get us to take sides? Are you going to be the conservative, structured, traditional, or are you going to be the liberal, no structures, freedom? Choose. I think that's exactly missing the point. We have to hold the tension of both of these to be free. Not because either one of those slips into servitude, slavery, lack of freedom, whatever you want to call it,
Tyranny.
tyranny.
Yeah. I think we see this in more emotionally mature individuals, that ability to hold the tension of, I am neither black nor white. I am not in political views, in ideological views. I see multiple parts of the spectrum and try to understand that black and white thinking, that extreme thinking can be dangerous. I see that most often in our young people, right? Feeling compelled to have to choose, the teenagers and young adults I work with, feeling that media is forcing them to choose a side. You have to be liberal or conservative, whereas those that are more psychologically mature, more mature in their thinking, are able to accept that gray area and to dance there and understand humanity and the variabilities of human behavior are neither black nor white.
And that's our conversation. And I had no idea where it was going to go, but I can feel it. It's the freedom of paradox,
Mm.
right? Of holding opposites, especially around the most complex things. Abortion, we're not going to get into it, but capital punishment. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever the hot topic, the topic du jour is, I've rarely experienced the either or. There's
Right,
always nuance.
right.
I haven't met anybody who hasn't had a nuanced opinion of abortion.
Hmm.
I don't care if it's, well, yes, only under this particular circumstance, whatever. That's a nuance.
Hmm.
That's this person's nuance, and your nuance is over here, but it's nuance. It's
Hmm.
not black and white.
Right. But too often we see that opinion in either in modern media or from the security of being behind the screen and away from, right. And when we have an interaction with another person, it is difficult to be, well, maybe for some people it's easy to be rude or demanding or abrasive. I mean, but when we step out from that screen and have a conversation, have a dialogue, we get to be in that nuance and to have that conversation, and to recognize it's difficult. I mean, difficult moral and ethical issues like that are neither black nor white. Let's go back again, celebrating the 4th of July. Go back to the 1700s, 1760s, 1770s. Nothing was black or white. It was just, hey, we are fighting tyranny. And I think growth throughout human history usually comes down to understanding the gray and rebelling against that tyranny of black or white thinking, of tyrannical thinking. Go ahead, B.
But it's not outside of us, it's inside of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I see the tyrannical comes from, because I can feel in me like I want to get behind my political view and hold to it and fight for it. And, is that freedom?
Right.
Right? Or am I stuck in this kind of loop of telling myself the same narrative, the same story, seeing what I want to see to validate my opinion, shutting down the other, demonizing the other?
Mm-hmm.
And this process of shutting down and closing out is the opposite of freedom. It's this tyranny you're talking about.
Dr. Frankl tells us that we are not free from conditions, but we are free to choose how we relate to those conditions, what our attitude is towards those conditions. And in conditions where laws are changing, traditions are changing, values are changing, we can take to social media and angrily oppose it, or we can take real action or try to understand the nuances, as you said, and dance in that gray, learn in that gray, and still have our opinions, but to act responsibly, to respond able, right? Not responsibly, but to respond in a way that takes healthy action, takes meaningful action.
But don't you think, I mean, that's easier said than done in the world we're living in today, because I've never experienced, the cancel culture, the on both sides, but
Mhm.
the off limit. We're not talking about this. You're not allowed to have an opinion about this. Don't bring this to the public arena. Here's the borders of what's acceptable and what's not.
Right.
That just shuts down this freedom we're talking about.
Well, let's go back to those intrepid people of the 1700s. If they allowed themselves to be shut down, maybe we wouldn't be here today having this conversation. We cannot allow freedom to be shut down, but get to choose how we relate to it. We get to choose. We don't get to choose the conditions. We choose our attitude. And here we are right now, you and I having this podcast with millions or hundreds of people, thousands listening to it and sharing that idea. Maybe, hopefully that impacts. We're not allowing, maybe somebody shut us off because you said the A word, abortion, or whatever word you said, right?
I'm sure I
Or
said
maybe,
something offensive.
right, of course, you've offended me 3 times, B. I keep count. No, but seriously, we can't allow it to cancel us. If somebody wants to cancel us and remain uninformed of the other side, well, that's their choice too. They get to choose that attitude. They get to choose their behavior. They don't get to choose the condition of whether or not Rabbi B and Dr. Dan are having a conversation.
Well, this is Frankel's greatness. And, you know, he represents so many other men and women who have shown us that the Nazis could not reduce him in his language to what they wanted him to be, which was, you know, a number, as I talk about a lot. You know, prisoner on his arm was 119104. And yet he said somewhere that he was never a number. He was never in prison. He was in prison. He was never imprisoned because he would choose to respond, you know, and be free, even if his body was incarcerated. And to me, that's freedom. Not allowing anybody or outside circumstances to dictate, right, what's going on the inside. Again, easy to say. So the work of a lifetime to do that.
Well, that's right where I was going to go. He said it. He had that attitude, but what did he do? He behaved that way in concentration camps. He reached out, you know, the stories in Man's Search for Meaning and his other works. He reached out to other prisoners. He used his skills that he had cultivated up until that point in his life to help others, to transcend the self, to reach out. Even in a concentration camp, he found meaning.
There was a moment in Man's Search for Meaning when he wrote about one of the lowest points for him. It wasn't an expected low point. It was when one of the Nazi guards or capos or whatever threw a rock at him to get his attention. And it was like you would throw something. I mean, I wouldn't. One might have thrown something at an animal, right? And it made him feel like an animal. And you could feel that tension in there. Am I going to react or am I going to respond? And that's easy to kind of chalk these up to, oh, Holocaust moments. But what about like in traffic? Somebody cuts you off, right? I used to tell myself, I'm going to show them, I'm going to get them, right? My younger version, I'm an Enneagram 8 for those Enneagram listeners. I go to anger like that. I used to tell myself that's who I am. And I think I would let myself off the hook. And now, as I've done a lot of work around the Enneagram and hopefully, you know, on myself, I really have a moment between stimulus and response, as Dr. Frankel would say, to choose. Am I going to react? This is just a stone being thrown at me like an animal. Am I going to react like an animal or am I going to be free? Not easy to do.
No, but necessary, and especially the world we live in now. You know, as he told us, there's that time between stimulus and response where we get to think. But too often, you know, rational emotive behavior therapy tells you this, that over time, this pattern is repeated over and over, and we become more animalistic. We lose that ability to stop and think because we just assess or we assume we know what the outcome is going to be, and so we don't think about it. And that comes in, for me, that comes up often in marriage therapy, in life with my own children, right? When you interact with somebody on a regular basis all the time, we develop patterns and we start to assume we know how somebody's going to respond. And very often for men, it seems to be that anger response becomes almost too easy. We see the behavior and we react or respond. But as Dr. Frankel says, we have that opportunity to pause, to think, to breathe, and to interject humanity, or at the very least, some form of thought before we react.
And that's the power. That's the freedom.
Freedom
is choice. We say this word and we think about this idea almost like it's, oh yeah, it's choice. It's the greatest gift we have been given, is the our power to choose, as Dr. Frankel says, our response, our power to choose. And as we both know, it doesn't come from us. It comes from the noetic, from a dimension beyond, call it the spiritual, call it ultimate meaning, whatever you want to call it, God. It's like, it's not earthly, the power of choice. It's divine, or it's transcendent. I can't explain it. I know it.
As he says throughout multiple writings, it's contained within us somehow, some way, in the soul, in the spirit, in that other dimension that science and mankind hasn't quite located or figured out yet. It's part of our consciousness, part of our spirit. It's somewhere in us, and maybe we figure that out someday, or maybe we just admit, well, we're not quite sure where that comes from. Maybe we'll never find it, but we know, like you said, we know, we feel it.
And, when people say, well, what do I do in this situation? I have no choices. I feel the absence of freedom, whatever your particular situation. That's where, but the power to choose is not nothing, right? The power even just to choose, I will take a deep breath while I'm being cut off in traffic. Because in that moment, I'm breaking this animalistic, this natural reaction, right? And the idea of natural, supernatural, beyond what's natural. Like, supernatural isn't just, being Captain America, wearing the shirt and playing the part. Breaking the pattern, choosing to break the pattern. That's something.
But let's argue. I'll argue. This is not my usual role to argue the devil's advocate side, but the behaviorists would tell you, they would reduce us, that reductionism, to no, you're an animal with drives and motivations, that you are not in control of that. Stimulus equals response. Therefore, you get angry, you show that individual some kind of hand gesture telling them what you really think about them, and you hit the gas really hard and move on with your day.
They're 100% right if that's reaction.
If that's reaction. And that's where our beloved Dr. Frankl and all the other logotherapists out there come in and say, no, between stimulus and response is the opportunity to think.
And that's, as Teddy Roosevelt called it, the arena, right? We're in the arena. It's a battle. And it might be the greatest battle of your life, if you're an Enneagram 8, as an example, to break that anger. Or, in the Enneagram system, if you're an Enneagram 1, to break. An Enneagram 1 walks into a room and sees what's not perfect. And I know this is foreign to you, but to break that pattern, I'm going to shift my gaze and not go for the critical kind of remark. I'm going to go for the appreciative, what's right type remark. That's a heroic act for a particular person to choose that.
Well, B is an Enneagram 1. I know that I know nothing about the Enneagram. I do know, as an ENTJ on the MBTI, that same, well, and I am an Enneagram 1, so those things come together in that scanning of the environment to find what is out of place and what needs done. For me, for all of you other J's out there that have that checklist of things that you need to do rolling through your head, and have your day, your week, your month, and your life structured out, and struggle with flexibility when something new comes into it, when a spouse, a partner, a coworker, a child comes and says, hey, I have this project due at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I know it's 9 p.m., but I have to get to the store right now. For a J, that is incredibly disorganizing, disorienting. And we can choose to become angry and inflexible, as we are so good with, or we can choose to step outside ourselves, to defy our MBTI type, and react kindly and lovingly and compassionately.
And that's where the MBTI or Enneagram or religion or whatever your system is a pathway to freedom. If you can understand it as helping me see where I lose my true self, where I go in fear, where I go in reaction, right? And we can utilize these systems to help us become free if they can start pointing to us where we lose our freedom.
Yeah, it goes back to that idea of being able to step out, to defy, as we said earlier, right? We have so many things are just coming together here, and that's often what happens with logotherapy and meaning, right? We have the opportunity to defy that tyranny of the self, to see where our reaction might harm others, harm ourselves, harm our relationships, and to behave differently.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I know I wanted to transition because I'm watching the timer and I didn't want to miss something because usually you're the time guy and you're like, and that was a good one. I'm like, no, dude, but I just love talking with you. As I told Dr. Sarah today, I just love to yap about this kind of stuff, and B's a good guy to do it with. But
I'm a good yapper.
I know you mentioned you are coming up with a lot of work in the genogram these days in family systems, and I mean that's my bread and butter sometimes as well. What's going on there? How does that? All right, man. Here's here's the $1 million podcast, right? How do we segue freedom into family and genogram?
Easy. Send over the check for $1 million because here it comes.
Hey, if Rogan can get 100 million, I think you and I can get a buck or two, B.
So one of the things I'm utilizing, let's kind of define a genogram for our peeps. It's a, how do we say it? It's a sort of a family tree where we're interested in more than just the genetics of these branches, but there's all kinds of ways to see these branches. So one of the ways I use it is looking at where we've come from emotionally, specifically the Enneagram. So what type was my father? What type was my mother? What are the reaction patterns that I witnessed and was influenced by and maybe adopted in my own life and my grandparents? And I can start to see from the Enneagram's perspective, oh, here's a 6 and here's a 7, and this is what happens and how I inherited it. But at the bottom line is, I think it's important, whether it's a genogram or just thinking about our past, what have I inherited that has gone unchecked or unchallenged that I've assumed is mine, when in fact, I'm just carrying around other people's shackles?
Yeah. First of all, you're taking a genogram and combining it with the Enneagram. Bro, that's amazing. That's some cool. That's a lot of grams.
That's a lot of grams. It's just the Geniogram. I got to figure out a word to merge.
The Geniogram. You just made a new. We got to do something about that. But no, that's really neat. So the genogram, right? We look. I do it through a simple family history, talking about the past, but it always comes up. We look at those broken relationships through the past, different people's history, addiction in past family, individuals, and how, whether we want it to or not, our family of origin and their family of origin impacts who we are today. And we get that here we go again. We have the freedom to choose how we're going to use that, right? No matter what happened in the past, we take good and bad from our families of origin.
To a degree, like if I had better genogram, I would have better hair, right? So like
Wow.
there's an inherited,
there, don't we?
There's an inherited reality. And my work is to operate within that reality, to understand what that's obviously a biological piece, but what have I inherited? Is it within my realm of power to change or to influence? To what degree?
Obviously, based on our haircuts today, no, neither one of us have the power to change that, but we do choose our attitude and how we cope with it.
And we don't have a comb over. That's a choice, right?
That's next time we get together, B, I want to see a comb over, because we're going to bring that back into style.
That was never in style when it was in style, brother. So.
It's funny. Both my brother and I say that our father stole all of our hair because he's got a beautiful gray head of hair, and we're both very jealous. But it is easier to be doing this. You're right. The freedom to choose, even in family systems and what we deal with from our family of origin.
But that's why you look at it, because I want to know what I'm dealing with. What are the ingredients that I got to bake this cake?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to bake a cake. The question is, can I alter the ingredients? Can I a little more of this, a little less of that? But degrees of difference are everything, mm-hmm. right? In baseball, we're in baseball season right now. 200 average, 300 average. Mm-hmm. It's a world of difference. Mm-hmm. And so if you can bring that degrees of difference into the ingredients you've inherited, and bake a Hall of Fame cake. Mixed up a lot of metaphors there.
Man, my head is reeling. Coming back to freedom and the Enneagram, whatever you're calling your new assessment tool, but in the end, it's the freedom to choose. We have freedom. And I'm remembering from Dr. Graeber's work that I shared a couple of weeks ago, some of the greatest freedoms we're seeing now. This is not uniquely American, but this is human. And that's one of the greatest things we're seeing in our times, is the rising up of human beings to choose to fight tyranny in a variety of ways. That doesn't always mean a war for independence. Sometimes it's the silent war on the inside as an individual, or it's taking responsible action against what you see in breaking traditions, in our falling traditions, and what the new traditions are we're designing and developing. We all, as humans, have that freedom to choose. We do not choose our conditions, we choose how we relate to them.
Amen. Well, we're going to continue on with this conversation when you get back from your world tour.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I don't know. We'll as I said to Dr. Sarah told me, like, well, you guys talk an awful lot. You and I broke this down. It's been about once a month, but we definitely have to get together next month, and we'll have much more to talk about, I would assume.
I can't wait, and I hope you and your listeners have a responsive and freedom-filled 4th of July.
Absolutely. Let's have a meaningful Independence Day. Hey, B, where can people find out more about what you're doing and what you're up to with your very cool Enneagram project?
Yeah, defiantspirit.org. Getting a new website going around that, and launching some new products, but focused on this synthesis between the Enneagram, Viktor Frankl, and freedom.
Outstanding. If you want to find out more about me and what I'm up to, you can take a look at danielafranz.com. That's DANIELAFRANZ.com. B, always a pleasure, man.
Sounds good, brother. Thanks, Captain America. Appreciate it.
You take care.